Meeting them was a great experience for me because I greatly loved their recorded work. They undoubtedly attend the same school as me. Finally, the truth about Jimmy Page is out. He concealed himself behind his guitar prowess for half a century. However, the secrets are too significant to be hidden. Anecdotes regarding the actual events of those Led Zeppelin tours. The connections that never ought to have been made. Even rock stars were taken aback by the behavior. It was necessary to lock hotel rooms from the outside. Little girls were kept out of sight. Page is now dealing with the fallout at the age of 81. The music industry is shocked to learn that this is not the Jimmy Page they were accustomed to. In the midst of World War, the second Jimmy Page was born in H, Middlesex, on January 9, 1944. His mother was a doctor's secretary, while his father was an industrial personnel manager at a plastic coatings business. A solid middle-class existence was led by the family. He attended Oola County Secondary School after attending Epsom County Pound Lane Primary School. No one could have predicted that this boy would grow up to contribute to some of the loudest and most influential rock music ever recorded. It was a safe, typical upbringing. When he turned 12, everything changed. A Spanish guitar was discovered by Jimmy at their Miles Road home. It ignited something inside him, but no one knew where it had come from or who had left it there. He developed an obsession with Elvis Presley, particularly with the guitarists he performed with, such as James Burton and Scotty Moore. He was also a fan of Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, and Lonnie Donegan. Jimmy read instructions and listened to records to learn how to play. He discovered icons like Sleepy John Estes, Arthur Big Boy, Crudup, Muddy Waters, and Howlin' Wolf while tracing the origins of rockabilly music back to its blues roots. He wrote years later of his trip to Tupelo, the hometown of Elvis Presley, and claimed that it required Elvis's intellect to combine those influences and transform the world. For Jimmy, this was more than a pastime. The musical vision that will shape his life began at that time. A young Jimmy made an appearance on the BBC's All Your Own in April 1958 as a member of the J.G. Skiffle Group. When the episode was filmed, he was just 13 years old. He talked about his desire to become a musician on air, but he also mentioned that if a cure for cancer wasn't found by the time he grew up, he would be interested in finding one. In this TV moment, he performed for the first time in front of a national audience during the height of the skiffle craze in Britain. Jimmy had to make a decision as a youngster, but it was a tiny step that gave him hope that music could take him far beyond West U. While he was being drawn more and more into music, his parents thought he would choose the safer route in science. Although he attended Sutton Art College, he played in bars and on street corners most of the time. At the age of 19, he made the decision to dedicate his life to music in 1963. He acknowledged that he had no idea if he would be successful, but he was certain that he wanted to be involved. Jimmy was one of the busiest session guitarists in London by the middle of the 1960s. Working 6 days a week, sometimes 3 recording sessions a day, he was able to play acoustic guitar, rockabilly, blues, and even harmonica. Because he could quickly adjust to anything, producers adored him. To distinguish him from Big Jim Sullivan, other artists dubbed him Lil Jim P. In addition to earning him money, this steady employment taught him everything there is to know about recording and producing music skills that would come in handy later. Jimmy was frequently used as a backup guitarist for bands whose main guitarist was unable to complete a recording. He occasionally performed uncredited on early Kinks and Who songs. I am unable to clarify The Who's. Jimmy nonetheless showed up on the B-side Bald-Headed Woman, despite Pete Townshend's reluctance to let him play. Due to this behind-the-scenes work, most people were unaware that his guitar was included on numerous well-known albums. Jimmy was just 20 years old when he played guitar at Abbey Road Studio, 1 in August 1964, while Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger theme was being recorded. He saw her master the song in a single take before collapsing after holding the last note for a long time. He also collaborated on the first time with John Paul Jones, who would go on to join Led Zeppelin. Whether Jimmy played on the instrumental or the main version is up for debate. However, the session connected him to one of the most well-known movie tunes ever. With a little assistance from my buddies, Jimmy performed on such popular songs as Joe Cocker's Donovan's Sunshine Superman, Petula Clark's Downtown, and Marianne Faithfull's As Tears Go. Throughout the 1960s, among many others, he collaborated with the Rolling Stones and Them. In the realm of the studio, confidentiality was crucial. Jimmy frequently didn't know who would enter the session until they did, and musicians didn't discuss which songs they performed on. He gained a thorough understanding of the business throughout these years, and he eventually made the contacts necessary to start one of the most successful bands in rock history. Jimmy Page was originally brought in to play bass when he joined the Yardbirds in June 1966. That was short-lived. In a matter of weeks, he and Jeff Beck were sharing lead guitar responsibilities, forming one of the most dynamic guitar duos in rock history. 10 years ago, in July and September of 1966, they recorded Happenings, which was the pinnacle of their sound. The two guitars intertwined in ways that had never been attempted before. However, the magic was erratic. Later, Page acknowledged that although some nights were flawless, others broke down when the components failed to sync. He would be following the plan, but Beck would be going in a completely different direction. The band ended up on a movie set instead on a stage the same year. They had accepted Michelangelo Antonioni's invitation to feature in his critically acclaimed film Blow Up. In one scene, Beck mimics Pete Townshend's well-known onstage devastation by smashing his guitar after an amp blows. The Yardbirds accepted the assignment after The Who declined. Later, Page recollected the weird experience of viewing the completed movie. They ended up waiting in line like everyone else to see themselves on TV, despite never having received an invitation to any premieres. Nevertheless, the incident turned into one of the few captured instances on video where viewers could truly see the guitar combination between Beck and Page. By 1968, the Yardbirds were exhausted from touring non-stop. Keith Ralph and Jim McCarty, who had been there since 1963, were worn out. While Page still wanted to push the band toward louder rock, they wanted to calm down and experiment with more acoustic folk-inspired music. Following 5 performances in Alabama on June 4th, their last U.S. dates were May 30 Honest and June Honest at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. These performances recorded a Band on the Brink and were ultimately released on a bootleg dubbed Last Rave Up In La. They formally announced McCarty and Ralph's resignation on June 12. On July 7, 1968, the final Yardbirds performance was held in Luton, Bedfordshire. Page had a big dream before the end of that chapter. He pictured a supergroup consisting of Steve Winwood or Steve Marriott singing, John Entwistle on bass, Keith Moon on drums, and himself and Beck on guitars. It was more than a dream. Page, Beck, and Moon had already performed together with future Zeppelin bassist John Paul Jones on Beck's Bolero in 1966. However, the plan was ruined by schedule conflicts, contracts, and personal matters. Moon was erratic. Beck left The Who to pursue his solo career while they were occupied. That ideal band never materialized. However, the setback compelled Page to start Led Zeppelin instead. Chris Dreja and Page were still contracted to perform with the Yardbirds when McCarty and Ralph left. They had to cancel or face legal repercussions. Quickly assembling a new band, Page even went on tour in Sweden and Denmark as the Yardbirds with Jimmy Page. He was able to enlist John Bonham, John Paul Jones, and Robert Plant as a result of this rush. The new band's first official performance as Led Zeppelin took place at SUR University on October 25, 1968. Page recorded the fact that they were paid $175 in his appointment book, a modest price for what turned out to be a momentous evening. Robert Plant was virtually absent from the scene. Terry Reid was Page's initial option for a singer. Together with the Beatles and the Stones, Aretha Franklin, then 19 years old, had once referred to one of the only 3 events taking place in England. However, Reid didn't want to sabotage the Stones' American tour, which was already scheduled. He suggested Plant and Bonham instead. Although Reed claimed he never regretted his decision, his suggestion helped to influence rock history. Early Led Zeppelin rehearsals were held in Pangbourne in a repurposed boathouse by the Thames. In 1967, Page used his savings as a session musician to purchase it for $6,000. The venue featured hardwood floors, a view of the river, and ideal acoustics for a band that combined hard rock, psychedelic, and blues. The others were immediately excited when Page performed the Whole Lot of Love riff for them. In those months, Plant's life had taken a significant turn. He had been living out of a suitcase and performing in small local bands for more than a year prior to joining. After joining Zeppelin, the first went from living in poverty to traveling throughout Scandinavia and flying abroad in a matter of weeks. The contrast stuck with him and eventually served as inspiration for his work with Wolverhampton's homeless charities. The music industry was irrevocably altered by the Led Zeppelin's November 11, 1968 agreement with Atlantic Records. Unheard of at the time, the label had no creative influence over their debut album because it was already entirely recorded when they signed. Under the terms of the deal, Jimmy Page's business, Super Hype Tapes Limited, was allowed to replace any band member with the exception of Page. The pact was signed only by Page. In the US, Canada, and the UK, the band received a royalty rate of 7.33%. In other countries, it received a royalty rate of 5.5%. The band had complete control over tour dates, record design, release schedules, and even which songs would be singles, but Atlantic was only allowed to issue 2 greatest hits albums annually. They notably disregarded all industry regulations by refusing to release any singles. The band also used Roman numerals to create a distinctive album name style. January 1969 saw the release of their debut album, followed by October 1969's Led Zeppelin II, 1970's Led Zeppelin III, and November 1971's untitled Led Zeppelin IV. There were only 4 symbols on the cover of the last one, no name or content. Page refused to provide over the tapes until Atlantic Records agreed, despite the label's disapproval and warning that it could ruin their career. The album became one of the best-selling records ever made, with at least 665 metal albums utilizing the digit 3 alone. The Roman numeral concept later impacted hundreds of bands. The emergence of FM radio presented Jimmy Page with a significant opportunity as well. FM was beginning to play entire album sides, but AM radio mainly played short singles. Page captured tracks that blended seamlessly with one another, producing extended listening experiences that were ideal for FM's aesthetic. Before the band ever arrived, manager Peter Grant created anticipation by sending advance copies of their debut album to FM stations in the locations they would tour. Despite never being issued as a single in the United States, this contributed to Stairway to Heaven becoming the most requested FM radio song ever. By 1973, they were surpassing the Beatles' previous records. Their performance on May 4th in Atlanta drew 49,000 fans, which was far higher than the Beatles' 33,000 attendance record. They surpassed the Beatles' iconic Shea Stadium audience of 55,000 by drawing 57,000 people the next day in Tampa. At the time, that performance earned $39,000, the highest amount ever earned by a rock concert. They set a record for a single-act indoor performance in 1977 when they performed for 76,000 people in the Pontiac Silverdome and made $642,000 in a single night. Page's recording methods in the studio revolutionized rock. He felt that distance equaled depth rather than putting microphones directly in front of amplifiers or isolating drums in dead rooms. He frequently placed microphones 20 feet distant to record the sound of the room. By flipping the tape while recording, he also employed reverse echo, in which the echo appeared before the primary sound. To make it obvious that the sound was his invention and not theirs, he switched engineers for every record. Outside of music, Page developed an obsession with Aleister Crowley, a cult figure. He purchased Balkan House, where Crowley had resided from 1899 to 1913 on the banks of Loch Ness in 1970. In addition, Page gathered Crowley's clothing, manuscripts, and other items. He also had a portion of Crowley's well-known slogan engraved into the groove of Led Zeppelin III. He owned an occult bookstore called the Equinox, which was named after Crowley's journal, and a palace in London called the Tower House, which has long been associated with ghostly tales. Page became acquainted with filmmaker Kenneth Anger because of their mutual interest in Crowley. Anger conducted an exorcism for Page at Boleskine in 1973. Later, while working on Anger's film Lucifer Rising, Page allowed him to edit a Led Zeppelin performance video in the basement of his London home. When Anger was expelled from the mansion in 1976 for providing unapproved tours to strangers, their friendship came to an end. After that, Anger openly humiliated Page and said that he had cursed him with King Midas's curse, which would freeze his career and make his success into nothing. Later, several fans connected this curse to Zeppelin's downfall and plant woes. The band's past was likewise tainted by violence. Peter Grant's 10-year-old son got into a brawl on July 23, 1977, at the Day on the Green Festival in Oakland, after a festival employee warned him not to take down a sign. In a matter of minutes, security guard Jim Downey was being attacked by John Bonham, Peter Grant, tour manager Richard Cole, and security worker John Binden. All four were eventually taken into custody by the police. Each of them posted $250 bond after being charged with violence. Television footage of the arrests showed them being escorted into the station with coats over their heads as Grant yelled angrily. Jimmy Page's life in the 1970s was a mix of extraordinary music and deeply troubling stories. In June 1972, while Led Zeppelin was on tour in North America, 28-year-old Jimmy Page met 14-year-old Laurie Maddox at the Hyatt House Hotel in Los Angeles. He introduced himself as Jimmy when he first spotted her near the pool. Peter Grant, the manager of the band, discovered her at the Rainbow Bar and Grill that evening, loaded her into a limousine, and drove her to Page's hotel. She later claimed that she lost her virginity to him on this particular night. The connection was unlawful at the time as California's age of consent was 18. Grant frequently kept her locked in hotel rooms with security personnel to conceal it. Page called her every day from England and occasionally took Led Zeppelin's private plane back to Los Angeles just to visit her. They were together for over 2 years till she was 16 in 1975. When she discovered him in bed with model Baby Bill, it was over. Many people think that the phrase about reaching 16 in the Led Zeppelin song, Sick, Again was inspired by their time together. Prior to it, Page met Charlotte Martin. She met him on his 26th birthday in January 1970, following a performance at the Royal Albert Hall. She was born Catherine Martin in Paris. She had dated George Harrison for a short time and Eric Clapton once. On March 24, 1971, their daughter Scarlett was born, and Page referred to her as My Lady. Living in London's music and art scene, Charlotte had converted herself from a rigid Parisian upbringing into a free spirit. Prior to their split in the early 1980s, she spent more than 10 years with Page during the heyday of Led Zeppelin. She later turned to painting, producing pieces that explored her connections to 1960s culture and her desire to escape her upbringing. On tour, Page's destructive tendencies were so terrible that the crew would occasionally shackle him to hotel restrooms. To keep him from ruining the place, groupies were left to keep an eye on him. He did a great deal of damage. In 1977, while staying at the Edgewater Hotel in Seattle, he hurled televisions out of 5 different rooms. Due of their past, the band booked accommodations under false names. In addition, he would go to transvestite bars and do drugs with drag queens while dressed in Nazi regalia. Sometimes the only way to enjoy a peaceful night is to shackle him, according to road manager Richard Cole. One of the most well-known groupies of the time, Pamela Desbars, claimed that Page frequently dressed in Nazi garb both in public and privately. He even appeared on stage in Chicago in 1977 wearing what he described as a stormtrooper suit, which resembled a Nazi uniform. His frequent visits to underground clubs coexisted with his drug usage and more unpredictable conduct. Property was not the only constraint on the crew. They were attempting to prevent hazardous and harmful public scenes. When Page was bidding on Aleister Crowley objects at a Sotheby's auction in 1973, she ran across director Kenneth Anger. They started collaborating on Anger's movie Lucifer Rising. Page pledged to write the entire soundtrack, but she only produced 20 minutes of music, much less than the required 40 minutes. Later, Anger claimed that Page was unable to follow through because she was constantly high on heroin. Their argument became sour as they claimed to have cursed him. David Bowie started to believe that Page was employing black magic against him at about the same time. Bowie kept bowls of urine around his house, had his pool exorcised, and drew pentagrams on his walls because he was paranoid. Robert Plant's family's road trip on August 4, 1975, took a disastrous turn when their rental automobile collided with a tree. Plant fractured his elbow, foot bones, and ankle. Maren, his wife, had injuries to her face, a shattered leg, 4 damaged pelvic bones, and a fractured cranium. Their daughter Carmen broke her wrist, and their son Carrick broke his leg. The island's medical facilities were so inadequate that doctors were dispatched aboard a private jet to return them to London. Doctors even said Plant might never be able to walk again. Their American tour, which had already sold 110,000 tickets for 2 performances at Oakland Stadium, had to be canceled due to this disaster. Numerous further stadium dates in Kansas City, Los Angeles, and other places were also canceled. It was a loss of millions. Additionally, the band's momentum was thrown off soon after they beat the Beatles' attendance record in 1973. The curse story of Kenneth Anger reappeared in 1976. Like the legendary King Midas, he asserted that Page's avarice and untrustworthiness would destroy all he touched. Later, occult scholars proposed that this curse was a component of the negative energy that surrounded the band's tragedy. While the band was touring America on July 26, 1977, Plant's 5-year-old son, Carrack, unexpectedly passed away from a stomach ailment. The distance to the plant was thousands of miles. His anguish was so intense that he even applied for a teaching position and thought about quitting music entirely. That day, he stopped using narcotics and put his family first. In 1979, the song All My Love was inspired by the loss. When drummer John Bonham passed away on September 25, 1980, following a day-long alcohol binge, it was the last straw. In a 24-hour period, he had taken about 40 shots. He slept at Page's house and choked on his vomit. On December 4, 1980, Led Zeppelin declared that they could not continue, instead of taking his place. Later, Page acknowledged that he didn't want to touch a guitar for months following Bonham's passing. He was already heavily addicted to drugs at the time. Page looked for the spark he had lost in the years that followed. In 1985, he founded the company alongside Chris Slade, Tony Franklin, and Paul Rogers from Bad Company. Although Radioactive was the highlight song on their 2 albums, Zeppelin's shadow hung over them. He was a member of the Honey Drippers, which released a single EP in 1984 and included Robert Plant, Jeff Beck, Nile Rodgers, and others. Coverdale Page. His collaboration with David Coverdale in the 1990s was frequently compared to Plant, who once made fun of Coverdale's vocal style. Page's talent was evident in every attempt. However, the special enchantment he shared with Bonham had vanished. During this period, Page wed Patricia Ecker, a waitress and model from Louisiana whom he had met while traveling with the company in 1986. They fell in love right away, and Ecker followed him to London. James Patrick Page. Third, their son was born in April 1988. Page's job life remained unstable despite the stability that came with marriage. After being together for almost 9 years, they got divorced in January 1995. Page described her loss as heartbreaking when Ecker passed away in October 2020 and commended their son for being smart and resilient. Outside of music, Page's fascination in the occult only deepened. In 1973, he purchased Bullskin House, which had formerly belonged to Aleister Crowley. a notorious practitioner of sinister rites. There have been ghost stories concerning the house since the 10th century. Page, who was aware that Crowley had previously tried a 6-month ritual intended to call forth and control spirits, including Lucifer, spent time there in the 1980s and early 1990s. The location is said to be cursed because Crowley never completed it. Page later purchased the Tower House in London, another site associated with paranormal activity, and an occult-themed bookstore named The Equinox. He sold Boleskine by 1992, claiming it had a negative aura. Its unsettling reputation was maintained by buyers between 2015 and 2019. Some blamed filmmaker Kenneth Anger for Page's renowned creative block during this time. When they were bidding on a Crowley manuscript in 1973, they had first met. Anger persuaded Page to compose the music for his movie Lucifer Rising, but it was never done because of Page's drug abuse and other diversions. Anger, enraged, cursed him, saying it would ruin his imagination. Coincidentally, Page stopped writing songs for more than 10 years, and his subsequent work mainly borrowed ideas from other people. Page's relationship with Brazil started to change the course of his life in the 1990s. He earned an honorary citizen of Rio de Janeiro and an officer of the Order of the British Empire in 2005 as a result of his substantial charitable work with Task Brazil and Action for Brazil's Children's Trust. He made friends with Brazilian musicians and established Casa Jimmy, a shelter for young people experiencing homelessness. One of the most significant occasions in music history was the one-night reunion of Led Zeppelin at the Otwu Arena on December 10, 2007. A Guinness World Record of over 20 million internet ticket requests was received. All proceeds from the $125 ticket sale went to charity. The band and the fans had an emotional moment as Jason Bonham replaced his father on the drums. Alongside The Edge and Jack White, Page also told his tale in the 2008 documentary It Might Get Loud. More recently, he said so in the 2025 movie Becoming Led Zeppelin. The documentary, which received a standing ovation at its Venice Film Festival debut, featured never-before-seen material from the band's ascent in 1969 and 1970. Page started dating poet Scarlett Sabat. In 2014, she was 46 years his junior. Together, they produced Catalyst, her spoken word album from 2019. They lead a calm and private life together, and she has called him her best friend. Page's standing as one of the best guitarists has endured over the years. In 2015 and 2023, Rolling Stone named him the third greatest guitarist of all time. He has won a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award and been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice with the Yardbirds and Led Zeppelin. His influence endures despite all the difficult years, conflicts, and reinventions.